Jane Kennedy, and I live here at Aldbrook Golf and Yacht Club. You may remember that Henry Ford said, history is more or less bunk. By the way, he also said, people can have a Model T in any color as long as it's black. The Spanish philosopher, author, and poet, George Santillanes, had a different take on history. He quipped, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Finally, Mark Twain, of course, is reputed to have said, and always had a good take on things, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. These different approaches to history are not entirely contradictory. Some history is bunk, in the sense of being boring or even useless, and there are repeating patterns to history. However, knowledge of history helps us understand ourselves and our society. It connects things through time and encourages students to take a long look at such connections and the legacies in the past and the legacies of the past in the present. Today's talk is an introduction to the history of Hood Canal and the peoples and industries that have helped to shape it. We are grateful to Mason County Historical Society for co-sponsoring this presentation. The Historical Society is dedicated to discovering, compiling, preserving, publishing, and sharing the history of Mason County, and maintains an extensive collection of historical memorabilia, you can see some of it here, and exhibits at its museum in Shelton. I am delighted to introduce Kristin Fabry, the director of the Mason County Historical Society, as our speaker today. Originally from Texas, Kristin's future husband, a native of Shelton, enticed her to visit him, in the summer, of course, in the hopes that she would move across the country and marry him. The plan worked, and she and her husband live in Shelton with their 2 children. Kristin has been director of the Mason County Historical Society since 2015. She graduated from the University of Texas with a degree in biology, not history, but biology is also about living things, so there must be some connection there. After graduation, she became a crime analyst for the Texas Rangers and worked as part of the Unidentified Persons and DNA Unit. After Kristin's presentation, there will be a short Q&A period, and she has brought along a selection of books and tapes on local history that the Mason County Historical Society sells. So if you're interested in buying one, please do. We would appreciate your support of the Historical Society if you wish to leave a small donation in the donation jar by the door. And we are recording this presentation for the Historical Society archives. Kristin, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on a Tuesday afternoon to do one of my very favorite things, which is share a glass of wine with friends and talk about history. So, like Mary Jane said, I'm originally from Texas, which means I ain't from around here. But as I say, in Texas, I got here as soon as I could, and I absolutely fell in love with the Northwest and Mason County and its unique landscape and the people here. And I thought, what better way to get to know my new home and the home that my children will grow up in, and hopefully their children, than to get involved with the Historical Society and learn more about the history of Mason County. So thank you for joining me today to learn a little bit more. My presentation today is going to focus on how natural resources have shaped the history of Hood Canal. I'm going to start the presentation and talk a little bit about the Historical Society and what we do there. If you haven't been in to visit us, we're on the corner of 5th and Railroad in Shelton, and we're free and open to the public. We're open Tuesday through Friday, 11 to 5 p.m., and on Saturdays, 11 to 4, so come in anytime. Okay, so a little bit of the history of the Historical Society. The Historical Society began in Belfair in the 1950s when Leah Livingston gathered a group of like-minded people to preserve the history of Mason County. Irene Davis provided space in her home for pictures and other files before there was a museum. So they had kind of an idea that there might be a location to keep these things in the future. They were collecting stories and items for future preservation. In 1976, they formed the museum out of the fairgrounds. And it was mainly built by volunteer labor, and it was to celebrate the nation's bicentennial. And there's also help from inmates from Washington Correction Center as well. Fairground Museum, originally named the Logging Museum, housed a 1930s kitchen and a living area, quilts, and office equipment. The 1928 Kimball Motor Company automobile, that's shown here. Loggers bunkhouse, saw filing shack, and great collections of agriculture and logging equipment, and vintage photos. Unfortunately, several years past, we lost our fairgrounds museum space, so now we just have our downtown location space. We have storage of a lot of those items around town, and the Historical Society is currently looking for a larger spot where we can display some of these items, like the 1928 car that we don't have room for right now. So bear with us, we're gonna get a bigger space to display some of these things. So this is what our current building looked like in 1914 when it was dedicated as the original town hall. And that's that celebration downtown. And this is what it looks like now. Not much has changed. So it was the library in Shelton for a period of time, and then became our museum in 1991. So we do several things over at the Historical Society. We like to discuss history and talk to anybody that comes in the door about what they might be researching, whether it be genealogy or if they have a specific subject in mind. We help them with that research. We have our researcher, Jan Parker, who writes articles for the journal that you may have read, historical articles. We do various publications, one of them being our newsletter. If you have a chance, I grabbed a stack from the museum. There's not enough for everybody in the room, but you can grab our newsletter, or you can check online to see what we have coming up. And then we do, we help with historic preservation of buildings, planning, construction, environmental history, and all of that. We help with all of that research. And then we help with preservation. So these older items that have been donated to us, we mark with our session numbers. We try to keep them in the correct environment that they're supposed to be kept, and rotate through displays. Always working to be better stewards of these older items that represent the history of Mason County. We also have monthly historical events. So our next one coming up is going to be the Downtown Car Show, which is this upcoming Sunday, June 24th from 8 to 3 p.m. It's a lot of fun. If you can make it down, please do. We have a pie and ice cream social at the museum itself, and they give out over 50 trophies, or they have 50 categories, and then they have oldies music, a big raffle. It's a lot of fun. That's right downtown in Shelton on Railroad. And then coming up in July, we're having a potluck at the Grant School in Pickering, and they're going to do a short presentation on the Grant School, the history of the Grant School, and then everyone's going to bring their favorite dish, and we're just going to enjoy the warm weather together. So, and then August 26th, we're having Mayumi Tutsukawa. She's coming to talk at the museum about the pine and the cherry, Japanese Americans in Washington. That's hosted through the Humanities of Washington Speakers Bureau, and should be a really good presentation. We're looking forward to that. We've had a couple speakers from that same program in the past, and they're really great program. Okay, here's our rowdy crew. So there's myself, the director, Shirley Earhart, who says she came with buildings. She used to work in the building when it was a library. and is our research. She knows a lot about genealogy in the Mason County area, how people are related. So if you have any questions, she's the one to talk to about that. We have Liz Arbaugh, one of our newer employees. Jean Fisher just joined us, is working Saturdays. Jan Parker, who I mentioned, who does the articles for the paper. And then we have several volunteers. Don Gravis is the Stanley, Terry Nelsie, and Candy Moran. So if you come in the door, these are the people that you're going to be seeing, and they're always happy to help with any project that you might be working on. And there's room on this slide if anybody wants to join as a volunteer too. You can squeeze your picture in there for sure. So I just wanted to start with a video about the landscape of Hood Canal. We live in a very unique place, and I just wanted to highlight some of the things that you can see here. And that's just, you know, the tip of the iceberg of the incredible area of Hood Canal that we live in. And it's incredibly resource rich. And so that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about how that has affected this area. So Hood Canal, let's go way back. And the rest of the Puget Sound were created about 13,000 years ago during the late Pleistocene by the Puget lobe of the Cordilleran ice sheet. So the ice sheet descended, and when it melted and came back, it made all of these inlets for the Puget Sound. So, and that's what created the fjord that we know as Hood Canal. Hood Canal is not actually a canal. A canal implies a man-made water passageway between two areas. It's a fjord, meaning it's a waterway, a natural waterway with cliffs on either side. So the fjord, and you may have seen the magazine called The Fjord about Hood Canal, was created by boulders trapped beneath its tremendous weight, which exploited weaknesses in the land and surfaced to gouge out valleys, many including Hood Canal, filled with seawater when the ice receded and the sea level rose from the melt. Stands of trees fell before the advancing ice can be found buried in the landscape to this day. And you can see glacial sediment around the area as well from this time period. Another thing that helped shape Hood Canal is these old growth conifers that you would see in the temperate rainforest in this area. During the time when flowering plants were emerging, they were pushing out these old growth conifers. But because of the unique environment of this, of the Hood Canal area, those old growth conifers stayed. And so you'll see that's why there's these gigantic trees, and what they would say, you know, timber with the one log loads, and you know, this really old growth trees that you don't see much more of anymore because a lot of it was logged, but some of them are protected. Okay, so here's Hood Canal. You can see the bend. This is the area we're specifically talking about. Okay, and here's some of the towns along Hood Canal have some of these highlighted in red, and that's just because these are the ones located in Mason County. So these are the ones in particular that we have the history on in our museum. It's not that we're not interested in the other ones, there's just other historical societies that keep the history of those towns. So if you're looking for those, that's where that'll be. So we have Belfair, Brennan, Eldon, Hoodsport, Lillywhite, Potlatch, Tahuya, Union. It's not all inclusive. Okay, so in the beginning, on Hood Canal, before any of the pioneers, there were the Twa Indians, and so which consisted of several different groups along Hood Canal. And here's an example of Salish Indian weaving a basket here, and there's a website actually that's coastsalishmap.org. where you can go and explore which communities were, let's see if this will come up. Which Indian communities were present along Hood Canal, what language they spoke, a little bit about their culture. This website has a lot of that information if you want to know more history. I'll move on into something else. Oh, here we go. Yeah, you can go to this website and actually Tva Bush. It says place of crooked jaw salmon, Twana, and it talks about the different tribes in the area. So some of the tribes, their family line died out. Others became incorporated into other tribes, and they have the Skokomish being the primary tribe that the Twana people became part of. Okay, so that in itself is the reason why we have a lot of the place names that we do along the canal. Twanage, which was anglicized to Twana, which being the Indians in the area. Quilseed is a Twana name. The people who were called the Quilseedabush are water people, in contrast to these as Skokomish, the freshwater people. Dunabush is corrupted from the original Dunya bush, meaning a reddish face, because the bluff or mountain near that place had a reddish face. Another translation, as we saw on that slide, also would be place of crooked jaw salmon. So there's been a little back and forth about the history. So Lillywhite is just at Mina Inlet. And Dosewalks. Twana mythology, the mountain of that name was long ago a man. When Mount Solomon opposite it was his wife, an apparently small but noticeable mountain far up in the valley. Between them was their child. Mount Tacoma Rainier was another wife of the same. And Hamma, called Hamma by his native name, translates to horse-tailed rush. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the towns that you'll find along the Hood Canal. Belfair, which is originally called Clifton. Search history books have a clear idea of why it was originally called Clifton, but the name was changed to Belfair because there were several other towns in the area named Clifton, so it became confusing. and the name Belfair is thought to come from Elizabeth Murray, who lived in Belfair, daughter of the Irving pioneers. Chose the name because she read it in a poem called St. Elmo by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So that's where the name of Belfair came from. And their original, one of the pioneers of Belfair was Alfred Jones. He was a postmaster in 1880. He was originally employed as a logger, as most of the people in the area were. Okay, and we have Brennan. The earliest Brennan settlers came to the area to log for the Washington Mill Company at Seabeck. Again, logging was the main industry in the area. When explorers came to this area, they said that the trees were thick as the fur on a dog's back, And people noticed that, and that's why we had this influx of people start to travel west and take advantage of these natural resources in the form of logging and fishing, shellfishing. So, in the History of Brennan by Lily Miller Christensen, she describes as when Mother Sarah Miller, a young widow with 3 children, was living at Symes, Colorado, she received letters from her sister in Vernon, Washington, telling of the great trees, many feet to the first limb, of the river teeming with salmon, of the thousands of wild ducks on the bay, of a potato that made a dinner for 5, of a cabbage head that weighed pounds, might be a slight exaggeration, that sounded to Mother like the promised land. But this is a good description of that. It was very natural resource rich, and that's why we had these Indian tribes that stayed put, as opposed to in other areas of the country where they were more nomadic and they had to hunt and gather. There was a lot here for them, and at first the land provided everything that they needed. This Hamma, Eldon area. The Hamma is oyster has become a rising star. You'll notice in a lot of the restaurants in and around Tacoma, Seattle area, you'll see it on the menu from Hamma. And here's early pictures of Hamma, mouth of the Hamma River, which was originally founded because of logging camps and the oystering that was available there. And if you haven't gone to Hamma, you should go check it out. The oyster bar there is amazing. Okay, and here's Hoodsport. I don't need to explain the origin of that name. For the next 50 years, they said, after discovery, little change until it was discovered that the tall, straight firs growing from the creek's bed made tall, straight masts for sailing ships. Again, that timber was a huge draw for people to come to the area to Hoodsport. So Captain George King Robbins and Ida Robbins wanted to put his boat building skills to work, and so settled in the area. Here's Lillywop. This is a picture in the top right. I actually put this picture on Facebook, and a lot of people responded that they knew people in the picture, so we've had some of them pointed out with their names. There's a huge pile of oysters, if you can't tell from where you're sitting, that they've been shoving in Lillywop. So Lillywop was a tourist draw from the early days, and it was known for Lillywop Falls, which is a beautiful waterfall. It shows a location over here in oystering. Unfortunately, that land was purchased and now is private property, so you can't get to the falls. So you just have to come to the Historical Society and look at the pictures. And then Union, which was originally called Skokomish, obviously after the Skokomish Indians. I don't know where the name Union City came from, but I know that McGreevy named it Union City. He recognized that the economic potential of the river, with its enormous old growth fir trees, again, to deliver the logs down the river valley to Lynch Cove. He built the first logging railroad in Mason County, incorporated at Union River Logging Railroad. So, and this is after people came here and they realized, wow, we have all of this timber, and they started all these logging companies. They're looking for a way to transport it, and that's where you come in with your ships and your and the railroad history of Mason County. Here's Tahuya. Name comes from the Tawana term meaning that done, meaning there was an event that happened in Tahuya, I don't know what, and was founded as a logging town as well. This is the Tva Post Office. Okay, potlatch comes from the Tawana name for festival for exchanging gifts, and it was a lot of Phoenix Logging Company employees lived in potlatch. So all of these towns have these things in common from the way that they started out, and it's that they shared natural resources in common. People were tempted by, here's a picture of a salmon run, the shellfish that were on the beach, and at first there was just, the beaches were littered with oysters. And those old growth trees. some temperate rainforest. So here are some of the different oysters that are grown in the area. Now, got the Kumamoto. The Olympia oyster was actually the oyster that was first, that's a naturally occurring oyster in the area. There was an oyster craze in the California area, and they were looking for a place to grow more oysters. And unfortunately, the Olympia oyster didn't satiate their need for like that big, more flavorful oyster. So we have these Japanese varieties that were brought over and grown in the Pacific Northwest because of the cold waters. It was a perfect place to grow them. So we have the Pacific's larger oysters and Kumamotos and Virginicas, all delicious. And gooey ducks. So when I moved from Texas, I told my supervisor there at the time, and she said, "What are you going to do in Washington State?" And I said, "I'm going to be a gooey duck farmer." She said, "What's a gooey duck?" And I said, "Why don't you Google image it?" To which she said, "Oh my." Gooey duck hunting is still a very popular sport in Hood Canal, and you can still go out recreationally searching for gooey ducks, and there's large commercial gooey duck farming in the area. A lot of those are sent overseas. So Americans, except for in the Northwest, maybe aren't the hugest fans of gooey duck. I think they're delicious though. And then mussels and clams. Okay, and then this is the timber that I'm talking about. This is one of the old growth trees. I don't know if you can see on the bottom here, but it says this is a Shelton toothpick, you know, and they've got the horse up there and the kids and the workers. I don't know how the horse got up that ladder. But these are those old growth trees that you would see when people talk about that one log low, those really, really old trees they don't see much of anymore. When people first came to the area, I mean, it was very exciting, and they cut down a lot of them. And now we have a lot of restrictions on these natural resources because we recognized what we thought would be abundant forever may not be. So, and then salmon. I tell my husband, you know, it's a good thing salmon don't know how delicious they are, because they would know that they're in trouble, you know. So salmon fishing, of course, is popular recreationally and commercially in the area as well. And these things not only shaped Hood Canal and the industry and how the towns were built and that people came here to be employed, but it became a vacation spot as well. So this is from the Hood Canal Carrier, and it talks about vacation times. It says, "Friends, Hood Canal has more health, wealth, and happiness to sell than any district in this country. When we think of the multitude of recreational assets surrounding us on every hand, it is strange that we should want to tell the whole wide. Is it strange that we want to tell the whole wide world about them? We can not only boast of luscious fruits and unusually fine garden vegetables in our fertile valleys, but we can stand on cool, scenic beaches and look up to the snow-clad spires of the enchanted Olympic Mountains, towering in the quiet, blue-domed heavens above. Here, too, you will find modern resorts, bathing beaches, picturesque, shady, wooded camping places by the hundred. There's not a month in the year that isn't good fishing somewhere on Hood Canal, or in the hundreds of mountain streams emptying here. The Olympics, America's last frontier, offer a labyrinth of trails, valleys, vales, and picturesque flowering meadows, icy glaciers, and distant mountain views. If on your vacation you seek health, wealth, and happiness, then come here where it said the fairies come from the south to spend their summer outings." So it's still an incredibly popular tourist destination. So you can see on websites like Explore Hood Canal, and it's really a very unique place, and people still vacation here, and built up a lot of the resorts in the area, such as Alderbrook. This is an old advertisement from Alderbrook Inn. Here's another old picture from the original Alderbrook Inn. There's Beacon Point Resort. Robin Hood Resort here in Union, Robinson's Resort, Lily Walk, Rose Point Resort, Shamrock Point Resort. I could go on and on. We actually have a whole other presentation just on the resorts in the area. Okay, so people vacation here and people settle here and they're enjoying these natural resources, and all of these things have created a culture in the Hood Canal area, and it's celebrated by a lot of people here and through some of these festivals. Inslee proclaimed June 4th through 11th Washington Shellfish Week. He said shellfish are crucial to Washington's economy, culture, and environment. Generations of Washingtonians have dug razor clams on the coast. Consumers around the world prize our state's oysters, improving water quality for its family shellfish farms. So we have Shellfish Week. And then we have Hamma Oyster Rama, as I was talking about before, in Hamma, and that's in April. We have Oyster Fest, which if you're from anywhere around here, you're familiar with, and the West Coast shucking competition that goes on there. And you can get your gooey duck fritters and your oyster fritters, and check out some of the nonprofits in the area as well. And our Paul Bunyan will be out there greeting people this year. So, and then Forest Festival, where we celebrate our logging heritage. So here's a more recent photo. There are tree topping competitions. We have some historical photos of sawing competitions and some of the floats. Here's a short video of tree topping competition. This is pretty impressive. So I brought some of the boots here. They're called forks, loggers' boots. So if anyone wants to try that at next year's Forest Festival, I will lend you these boots.
Are they judged on speed? Are they judged on speed?
Judged on speed, yeah, for this competition. I did another presentation on highway logging in the Hood Canal area, and there's this great quote from one of the high climbers, which was one of the highest paying jobs as a logger because it was so incredibly dangerous. But he said sometimes they would go up and they chop the branches on the way up the tree, and then they top the tree. But sometimes if there was a lot of branches and it was a particularly thick tree, they had to use dynamite to top the tree. So they would cut a hole with a hatchet into the tree and pack it with dynamite. And then he said you had about 2 minutes to get down the tree, which was ample time unless you got caught up. I don't know about that job.
That climber's name was Hap Johnson.
Yeah, Hap Johnson, and we have a lot of Hap Johnson's trophies in the museum as well. So if you get a chance to look at it, we have a lot of memorabilia from Hap as well.
Was that the fellow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was Hap Johnson. There's a great story actually. I showed you when they were having a celebration downtown and they tried to raise the flag in front of the museum and it wouldn't raise for whatever reason. So Hap Johnson came out, climbed the pole, and brought the flag up the pole, which everybody loved. So here's another festival, Tahuya Days. This is in July coming up, where it's a celebration of the culture of the canal and the Tahuya area. They do a salmon bake and there's a parade. Okay, and here's another festival that celebrates said salmon and the gooey duck festival in Allen. This is where I tried gooey duck ice cream for the first time, which I would really not recommend. So, ice cream was okay, it would be a lot better without the gooey duck in it. But Allen Days is a lot of fun, and people come out and they celebrate this culture of Hood Canal. Okay, and I'm gonna leave you with a Hood Canal blessing. And it's from Mike Fredson's book. It says, "May the tide always be in, may the waters always be warm, may the summer days refresh your body and spirit." I think that's what we're all experiencing right now. So I appreciate you all coming, and I'm gonna open it up to questions. And again, we have some artifacts that I want to point out to you right now. I talked about the Skokomish tribe. This is a Skokomish Indian basket. It's hand woven. This is sweetgrass, and was made in 1913 and traded to a grocery man for meat and a suit of men's clothing. In the Skokomish baskets have the traditional picture of the dog. You know, so the animal's tail is pointed downward. If you see a tail pointed upward on the basket, that's representative of a deer. So the dog represents the Skokomish tribe, like the lucky dog casino. And then these are the boots that I was talking about. They call them either caulks or corks that the loggers would wear, and these treads would help them from falling down in the woods, whether or not they're climbing trees, just when they're tromping out in the woods, would keep them from sliding down muddy hills, and they could get some traction. I also brought some fossilized shellfish, what appears to be a fossilized razor clam, and some other bivalves here in the area. They're not quite as old as we originally thought them to be. It actually doesn't take very long for clams and bivalves to mineralize like this. So you can take a look at those. And then I've got some books for sale up here if anybody's interested. Does anyone have any questions?
How long do they take to mineralize?
They said it can be as little as like 5 years.
Really?
Yeah. So at first we thought these are very old, but we had a gentleman come into the museum that taught us a little bit more about how these are formed, and it can happen rather quickly in the water.
I have a question. Did Tva assimilate to the other tribes because of smallpox? Because I understand a lot of them died because there's a lot of Native Americans did.
Yeah, a lot of the tribes that were considered Twana, which were several different tribes, died out. Their bloodline is extinct, and then the ones that survived became parts of the tribes. The Skokomish tribe being the primary tribe.
I'm always curious as to where the location of, and I don't know if I'm saying it right, the Mount Olympus, the artist colony, where your nobles and everybody, they have these, look like a glorious building, but I don't know where it was.
Yeah, right on the water, and we have plans. It's hard for me to explain without showing it to you on a map, but if you do come into the museum, we have plans for when he originally built the Olympus Manor in Union, and then when Olympus Manor burned down, Orrin nobles actually had plans to build a new building, and they're incredibly beautiful. We plan on having an exhibit at the museum of just everything from Christmas cards that he sent to, everything he did from the blueprints to this new building that he was going to make were not just functional. Everything that he did was a work of art. It's pretty incredible.
Do you know where the Blue Heron condominiums are? That's where Olympus Manor was.
Okay.
I was just gonna say that. Did he die? Is that why he never rebuilt?
No, he moved to he had a retirement home in the that he built on a hill in the Seattle area. I don't know why the plan never came to fruition. If it was money or not enough help, I don't know why it never came to fruition. Of course.
But that was the end of the artist.
It was, yeah, that was the end of the artist colony. So, and I brought some of the Mike Fredson's book, Artist Colony on Hood Canal too, where he goes into a lot of detail about Nobles and the people that were involved in the artist colony. And I think Union is still, it started with Ori Nobles, but Union is still really known as an artist community, you know, so that left a lasting impact in this area. Anyway, I just want to thank you again for coming and sharing your time with me. Yeah.
This is frivolous, I agree. Why in Britain is the Gooey Duck Cafe not so gooey duck?
I have asked this question so many times. I said, why don't they have gooey duck on the menu? You can't name your restaurant Gooey Duck Cafe, and just a fried appetizer, something, you know. I don't know, it's a good question. I think we should start a petition.
Is it seasonal, or maybe is that the
It
problem?
is, but a lot of people do. I mean, you can get it frozen. They have it in chowders. You can buy it. Taylor's actually, Zinn's restaurant in Shelton, made gooey duck chowder, and Taylor's in Shelton actually still carries that gooey duck chowder, so you can still get that. So you can find it places for sure.
Right.